and welcome back. We're moving on to week 6, part 3. Yay! This is the end of your class lecture work. And at the end, I'm going to ask you to do a little bit of homework. I hope that it's not too severe for you, but I think you'll be fine. You know, I'm a human and I'm an open person, so if you ever have any problems or issues, please don't ever hesitate to write to me and let me know what's happening and what's going on. Something I should probably talk about, that's another issue that students seem to be having problems with, is please remember that your submissions, when you hand in your assignment, must be before the submission deadline. So for example, for your homework for this week, even though I know it's Chuseok week, you still have plenty of time to do your homework. Your homework for this week is going to be due October 4, so please don't forget about it. October 4 before midnight. Now, I'm really sorry, but I need to have a cutoff time. So if you hand it in after 12, you are absent from that class. Okay, so you really need to focus on getting your classwork done and hand it in before 12 a.m. If you do hand in the assignment late, what that essentially means is you are absent from that class, but you still get the participation points for doing the work. If you have any questions or you're unsure about any of this, or if you have any issues or any problems, maybe some students have told me that their computers are old or they have bad internet connections. Of course, that's, I understand what's happening, but please do your best to submit your assignments on time. And if you're going to submit them, I'll accept up to a week late, but after a week late, then the assignment time is finished. So moving back, we're now moving on to week 6, part 3. This is citing. Now, citing is an important topic for the university level. So essentially, this is something that you can teach your young students, but to plan your lessons is basically the key, because you want to keep it to the level that suits your students. What I'd like to do to start with is what we're going to do is we're going to practice. Now, what I would like you to do first for part of your assignment is I would like you to choose a book. Now, obviously, access to books might not be easy, but part of why I chose this for Chuseok is I imagine that many of you will go home, and I also imagine that many of you will have books at home. So if you do not have books at home, please feel free to use the internet and find a book that you are interested in. Now, you can choose English or Korean, but I recommend English because it's just simpler. It's much easier to deal with the English language books, because what we're going to do, we're not going to read the books. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at how to talk about the books and how to cite a book. So to cite a book basically means, for example, so for our course this semester, I'm using this Spectrum Language Arts Grade 4 book. So if you want to find this book, or you want to, maybe you do some exercises in here that later you want to use as part of a presentation, or you want to use them in your own classes in the future, maybe you want to find this particular book. So essentially what we do for citing is we give the information so it helps people to find that book. So this is what we're working on for part 3. So the first thing I want you to do is to choose a book. I would like it preferably in English, but it's not a terribly big deal. The problem with choosing a Korean book is then you have to decide about, should you translate or should you use English letters only? And then how to change from Korean into English sometimes can be a little confusing. So just to be simpler, I think English is probably better, but I will leave it up to you. So I'm going to show you. I'm going to choose one of my books. Okay, I'll choose 2 books because this one is this is an academic book, so perhaps it's not so interesting for many of you. So I'm going to go and find another book. And here's my second book. So this is these are my 2 choices, but of course all you need is one. If you want to do more, then you're very welcome to do more, but your homework assignment is just to choose one. So what we're going to do to start with is we're going to practice something that I encourage you to do, but many young people don't like to do it. But I promise you it's really, really good advice. And that is to brainstorm. Now, the biggest question that I have for you is to ask you, what does brainstorm mean? Now, you should be thinking about it in the idea of the 2 parts of the word. So this is a compound word, brain and storm. Why do we put these 2 words together? So I'm hoping you came up with the 2 ideas of the first point being the brain, so thinking. So it should be thinking, a storm of thinking. When you think about a storm, do you think about fast or slow? And what about the speed of a storm? Do you think that when the rain comes, when the wind comes, do you get a lot of rain? Or just a little bit of rain? Do you get a lot of wind? Or just a little bit of wind? So I'm hoping that in both cases you chose the former, the first ones. So essentially, a brainstorm is when you think about something, you don't spend a long time doing it. It should be very, very quick, and it should be very fast. And also you should try to think of as many ideas as possible. So this is not, supposed to be about beauty. It's not supposed to be about slow thinking and, taking your time. The point about this is to get a whole bunch of ideas together immediately, as fast as possible, as quickly as possible. So what I'd like you to do first is I'd like you to brainstorm 15 words for why you chose your book. So I'd like you to do that now. And I suggest you take about 10 or 15 minutes to write them down. So I'd like you to pause the video now and take your time to do that. Or of course, if you want to do it shortly, then that would be fine too. Okay, so remember that you should pause the video and write these down yourself, but I'm going to continue because it's boring for you and for me to sit here with the silence. So what I've done is I did a quick brainstorm. This is very, very simple. It doesn't have to be, extensive, but I think 15 words is pretty much a minimum. So I opted for this book. Okay, so what I did is I put the title of the book in the center of my page, and then in brackets I put to remind myself. Brackets are also called parentheses, but brackets is usually what we tend to use, especially for smaller children, elementary school level. So I put why I chose, because this is to remind myself, okay, this is what I'm focused on, this is my topic. And I put the title here, The Art of Case Study. Notice that I'm using capital letters still because this is a title, so I'm still trying to continue that habit. And then what I've done is I've written down a whole bunch of different words that I thought about when I decided to buy this book. So what I'd like you to do is to do your brainstorm, and then What I'd like you to do next is to think about the 3 most important reasons. So you have your 15 choices here. Okay, these are all reasons why you chose this book, why you like this book. So out of all of these choices, what do you think are the 3 most important reasons, the most important reasons why you chose the book? Okay, so I went through and I looked at them. And I thought, yeah, I think that's true and that's true. And then what I did is I took 3 highlighters and I decided which of my words were most important. So I also put a little number beside them to help me decide which order I was going to talk about them in. So essentially what you're doing here is you're choosing your details because you're going to talk about why you chose your book, or actually for your final assignment, we'll discuss that shortly. So in the first case, I chose the book because it's quite small. And then anything that I could find that was connected with the size, I also attached, because these are different ideas that I can talk about when I'm talking about the size of the book. In the second case, I chose good information because this book was, it's easy to read. I found it quite easy to read. And also it's interesting. So I connected those ideas with this book as well. The third detail that I chose for why I chose this book is because the author is quite well known. He's not a famous author for the world, but he's quite a good author for research. So I chose that as a topic, and then I also chose a couple other points that I thought were good details to attach to this. You don't have to follow this style. These are just recommended ways. Now, of course, some of these points were not important, and I didn't really feel like they connected to any of the other details, so I just ignored them. The fact that I thought the cover was quite pretty, it doesn't matter. And it couldn't connect to the fact that it was small, it didn't connect to that it was good information, and it didn't connect to a famous author, so I didn't bother to use it anymore. Also, the fact that it was inexpensive, I didn't find was a particularly important point when it came to the size of it. It wasn't about good information inside the book, and also it wasn't about the author. So I also opted not to include inexpensive. So it's up to you, but the idea is that you move from your basic brainstorm, moving on to deciding what your 3 details are or would be. Now, I do not need to see these. Okay, these are just simple ways for you to do it as, practice. But what I'd like you to do is next, I'd like you to take a look at your book and find the information here. So in the first case, we have the book's title. So you're going to fill in the book's title, and can you remember what's special about the title? Good. I hope you said capital letters. So you can even see in this case that this book is great because we've got the capital letters all ready to go. Of does not need to be capitalized. So use your capital letters to show that it is a title. And in the second part, we want to talk about the author. Now, in a minute, I'm going to give you some pointers about the names again, because perhaps you've forgotten a little bit about how to write names in English and how names work in English. But we'll talk about that in a minute. So you need to write your author's name down. And then we've got where and what year it was published. So the issue for this is where to find it. So what I've asked you to do is search for it. Now, this can be in different places in different books. So in this case, I look inside my book and I can find the publisher on the first page, because we also need the publisher. And we also find where. So the first place that I see here is Thousand Oaks, but I wasn't familiar with Thousand Oaks, so I looked on the inside page here. And if you look through, and you will have to search, it's not going to jump out at you. You have to take your time and look through it. You'll find a date. So basically, if you find a number of dates, then you want the one that's most recent. So if, for example, it was published in 2008 and 1995, then what year would you write? Good, 2008. So what we want to do is then we take a look down at the different places it's been printed in, and I've got Thousand Oaks, California. So this would be where it was published, okay? Now, sometimes perhaps, although it would be unusual, sometimes you would sometimes you may not have the information readily available. It might be, you should be able to find it. But in some cases, maybe the author isn't easy to find, or you can't find the city where it was published. So if you can't find the information, you can skip it, but try your best to find the information if possible. Once again, so you need to find the city, the place it was published in. If it just gives you the country, that's also fine. It should be maybe city and country, or you can do city and state. Okay, so for example, that's what I did with Thousand Oaks, California. And you should also write down the year it was published in. So remember, if you have 2 or more years, then you want the most recent year, okay? And the third point is the publisher. What was the company that made the book? Who published this book? Who gave this to the public? Who made it into, you know, this type of book and gave it to the public for sale? So we're going to move on now to more details of citations. So I've given you an example citation here, and essentially the way a citation works is that there's a pattern, okay? So we have to follow the pattern. And this is acceptable for all academics. So this is true also for you if you want to. For example, if you read a book that you really enjoy and you find it very interesting, perhaps about education or elementary school politics, I don't know what your interests are, you could take a look at the back. There's a bibliography. There's usually a references section, same for journals. And if you take a look through, you can find this pattern. It will vary because it depends on, for example, this is, there are slightly different formats that can be used in the books, but because the books that I was imagining that you would find were perhaps more about reading books, I opted to follow this pattern. Essentially, you just want to give all of the relevant information so that anyone who wants to read that book can find that book. So what I've given you here is the pattern of family name, comma, given name, period. Okay, so we're going to talk about that in a minute. I'm going to talk about each of these stages. So the next thing that we would choose to talk about is the title. Okay, so the title of the book. And then we would give the city and state, or you could give the city and the country as well, depending on what the how the publisher works, because different publishers are different sizes, just like any company. And then you give your, so after you give the city, state, or province, then you give a comma, your publisher's name, so the company that published it. And finally, you give the date it was published. So again, you give the most recent and a period right after to show that you are finished. So what I did here is I gave you the citation using my book. Okay, so I'm going to talk about each of these stages as we go, but I also want to explain fairly quickly about why. So the reason why we cite, okay, so what I want to do first is I want to talk about citing itself. So what I have had problems with in the past is that many students like to take information from the internet, but they don't want to tell me where they got it from. But some of it's really interesting information, and I want to find that information also. So you cannot cut and paste off the internet. You cannot cut and paste out of a book unless you say where you got it from. So to cite is to show where we got our information from. If we look at number 2 here, so I'm on slide 31, why? Why do we cite? And again, it's the same answer. We want to show where we found this information. So if somebody else says, oh, wow, that's really, really interesting. I really want to read that book. I have heard about that book. You know, how do you find it? What's the name? They have the information right there at their fingertips. They can go out and find it. Next, so I'm on slide 32 now, is when. When do we cite? So basically, if another person wrote something or another person thought something, they wrote something down, then you have to cite it. If you do not cite someone else's work, but you take their work, this is called plagiarism, okay? And plagiarism basically is saying, oh, I take this person's ideas, this person's work, and I say, oh, I did this. So imagine how you'd feel if you wrote a book or you made a movie or you published some philosophical ideas and someone else took them and said, I did that. You know, all that effort, all that hard work that you did, someone else is taking credit for. So essentially what we want to do is we want to say, that person did a really good job, they worked very hard to do this, and we want to show that it was them that did the work, and we found it and we liked it. So I've moved on now to slide 33, which is asking about plagiarism. So essentially my point about this is please don't copy. This is why I'm showing you how to cite, so that if you take words or if you take ideas from other places, just show me where you got them from, so that then if I'm interested or if other people are interested, then they can go and find those ideas as well. So I'm looking now at number 4, why must we cite? So we have to cite because another person made those things. They worked hard to do that. So if you don't cite, basically you're stealing from them. It's not as simple as, you know, oh, here's someone's phone. It's not my phone. I'm going to take it. That's one type of stealing. But this is stealing people's, you know, work, their ideas, their thoughts. This is called plagiarism. So I chose a quote here from Aristotle. So it's not our choice of good or evil that determines our character, or it is, sorry, it is our choice of good or evil that determines our character, not our opinion about good or evil. So, you know, the idea is that even if you think, you know, oh, it's a bad idea for me to say, oh, I wrote this book. What's actually true is, do you bother to write, this person wrote the book, and take the time to show that it was them. So question number 5 is, where do we cite? So usually we cite, as I showed you in the book, we cite at the end of your writing. So in this case, because it's a book, it's at the end in the appendix or perhaps in the bibliography. But it depends on how long the writing is, basically. Moving on to slide 34 is how to cite. So once again, I'm going to go back to the slide that we looked at before. And our basic question is, sorry, I just lost my place there. How to cite. So what I'd like you to do is fill in the blanks on your week 6 assignment. And basically what I'm looking for is for you to just tell me about the book that you chose. So I'd like you to give me the family name, the given name, the title, city, state, or province, and the publisher and date. And again, if that information is missing, skip it. So please try it. Now, what I'd like you to do is also to write a paragraph about your book and why you chose it. So what I'm going to ask that you do is to write 2 sentences that introduce your book, why you liked it generally. Please remember that you're talking about I, but try not to use the word I too much. And the possessive pronoun is mine, or my, you know, my book, my choice, something like that. The next thing I'd like you to do is to write 2 detail 1 sentences. So remember that we're going back to why you chose the book. Could be for any reason that you like. Why was your book interesting? And remember, please, to use your transition words. And then please write your detail 2. Detail 2 sentences. And this is your second reason. So for me, this would be my orange one. My second reason for why I chose this book, why I thought the book looked interesting. And the third one is to write, of course, two detail sentences about detail 3. So in this case, we've got our detail 3 is my famous author. I'm going to write 2 sentences about that, somehow recommended, difficult subject. And then, of course, you're going to write your 2 conclusion sentences, which are going to go back once more. What was your book called? Why did you like it? Okay. So we're going to move on now to our assignments. So the first assignment, of course, is to write about the book you chose, and to use your transition words, please. And then the second assignment that I'm going to ask you to do is I've scanned 3 pages from this book. It's pretty easy. It's not particularly difficult. In each case, I think that in the first one, there's only four answers. Second one, I think, is 5 answers, and the third one is 8 answers. So it's pretty easy. So do your best to work hard for your homework, and I hope you have a fantastic Chuseok. Goodbye.